Ukraine Today is joined by Mr. Dan Levinson, the son of Robert Levinson, one of America's longest-held hostages. Mr. Levinson, welcome to Ukraine Today.
Thank you for having me.
Mr. Levinson, your father was taken hostage back in 2007, and while there is some controversy as to whether he was working for the U.S. government at the time of his capture or not, the fact remains the fact that he has been held hostage for more than 8 years now. So, Mr. Levinson, what is the latest on the attempts to find and rescue your father?
Well, right now there are negotiations going on between the U.S., some other European governments, and the Iranian government over their nuclear program. And during that time, my dad's case is also brought up, along with there are 3 other Iranian Americans who were being held as well. And the government officials are discussing terms of the nuclear deal, and on the sidelines they're also discussing our family's cases. Right now we're very hopeful that this high-level engagement, which the U.S. and Iran have not had for decades, can produce some sort of I guess, progress on my dad's case. They're asking for help in locating my father because he did disappear in their country. There was an Iranian media outlet that reported that he was being held by the Iranian government and he had been detained. So they have been following up on that and pushing the Iranian government to make sure that that's addressed. Whether that's part of the final agreement, we don't know. We would to see my father home as soon as possible, but of course with this agreement, if it were to be completed by the end of this week.
How would you assess the efforts of the U.S. government to find and locate your father? I know the Secretary Kerry issued a statement asking the Iranian government to cooperate into the investigation into the whereabouts of your father. I know there is a promise by the FBI of a reward of $5 million about the information on the whereabouts of your father. But is this enough? Would you expect something more to be done?
Well, as we've said before, it's never enough until my dad is home. We're very appreciative of these efforts, particularly the FBI. They've been very dedicated to the case. Secretary Kerry has brought it up on numerous occasions, and we are appreciative of that, but we need it to be brought up at every discussion that the U.S. has with Iran, every available contact that they have among the officials. And, well, we meet with the officials as much as possible. We're always in contact with them on a weekly basis, but it's never going to be enough until he is brought home to us. President Obama did, when he spoke with President Rouhani of Iran, the Iranian president was in the U.S. a couple of years ago almost for the UN General Assembly, and it was they had a historic phone call. It was the first time the 2 presidents of our countries had talked since the 1970s, and during that short phone call, he did bring up my father's case, and he talked about his concern for my father and asked for him to ask for their help in returning my father home. So we are happy that they do these things and they're saying these things, but so far it hasn't resulted in, my father even, there hasn't even been acknowledgement that my father is being held over there, and there hasn't really been much progress on getting him home. So while we're appreciative, we need more to be done because we need to ramp up the pressure, especially with these this crucial time with the nuclear talks going on.
What about some sort of back-channel negotiations? Would you expect something this to happen?
We hope that those kind of talks are going on. We don't know. They're not going to tell us one way or the other, and that's the way these things are. But that's besides the statements the officials give and the diplomatic channels that they have. We're hoping that these back channels that people wouldn't necessarily know about are producing some sort of talks, but my family's not privy to those kind of talks.
Understood. Mr. Levinson, I assume you are aware of the situation in eastern Ukraine throughout almost more than a year of military hostilities in the east of this country. Hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers and volunteer fighters were taken hostages, were taken prisoner. And there are cases where the militants, the Russia-backed militants, who have Ukrainian soldiers detained, are contacting the families directly with the demand of ransom. And obviously all the families are ready to pay that. They find the money, they borrow the money, and they deliver the money either directly or through intermediaries to these Russia-backed militants. In some cases, following this, the soldiers are being released. In some cases, they're not being released, so the families are just fooled. What would be your position on that? Would you advise the families to negotiate, to contact directly with the militants?
Yes, for us, we were actually emailed a video of my father and back in November 2010, and we were emailed pictures 6 months later. And during we were emailed from anonymous email addresses. Then we tried to follow up with them, and that was difficult for us because we know that they never were very serious about anything that they would have asked for in return for my father. And at least these families have that opportunity. The U.S. has a new hostage policy that they just enacted a couple weeks ago, and there's a big debate over paying ransoms and dealing with captors of American hostages. And the big debate was over, is that going to encourage more hostage-taking and things like that? But as a family member, I understand completely the willingness to do whatever it takes to get your loved one home. So we sympathize with that and empathize with that, and I think if the families can follow up with these captors and keep that channel of communication going, they need to pursue all options because their loved ones are suffering over there and are just desperate to get home to their families. So I would encourage them to keep that channel going. As far as I don't know how the Ukrainian government's policy on intervening in that kind of thing, or if they would discourage that kind of action because it could encourage more hostage-taking. But I consider these families lucky that they can even have that kind of channel. So I would recommend they pursue it and see if the captors are serious about this kind of exchange.
Mr. Levinson, I know that you're planning to run for Congress in 2016, and one of the objectives of the current trip to Ukraine is to meet with Ukrainian officials to discuss what else United States can do to help Ukraine during this very dangerous, I would say, situation. So what are you hearing from the Ukrainian officials? What would they like U.S. to do more?
Well, I came over here because I am mulling a bid for Congress. There's still, it's a very complicated decision, and there are things I'm still trying to consider. But I wanted to come here now before I make that decision in order to find out how the U.S. government and how U.S. officials can provide help to make sure that there's more of a stable situation in Ukraine and that there's a peaceful resolution to this conflict. And I was able to meet with some members of the military the other day. We provided some supplies and medical supplies and things like that. And obviously, more is needed. And the U.S. has a big debate going on right now, and we have a lot of issues that we're discussing foreign policy-wise. But some of the things that are being discussed among lawmakers is the role the U.S. can play in this situation. And I came here to find out more information and what would actually be needed, what can the U.S. Congress do, and how can we raise awareness around the world that there's still a situation going on, that we have Greece, we have ISIS, we have American financial situation, economic situation. So there's a lot of things going on, but it has not been much of a priority, even in Western Europe as well. So I wanted to monitor the situation. I want to see what we can do and how, if I were to end up going to Congress, where I can be of help to the Ukrainian people.
Mr. Levinson, you just said that you're hearing that more should be done. What exactly should be done?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say that there should be weapons or that kind of supplies yet, because that's a big debate, because that will escalate the conflict, I think. And I think at least the bare minimum is supplies to the Ukrainian troops and soldiers, and providing them kind of a technical expertise that the U.S. government the U.S. military could provide. Of course, that's a big debate too. So I'm still just getting the lay of the land and finding out from them what we can do. But it was an eye-opening experience, to say the least, about seeing this current situation and what these soldiers are going through.
Well, it looks like these are some very complicated issues. Mr. Levinson, many thanks for coming to us and talking to us. This was Volodymyr Sulu for Ukraine Today, together with Dan Levinson, the son of Robert Levinson, America's longest-held hostage. Thank you for watching us.